Hello, I'm Carly. I'm 17 now, but this story happened when I was 15. I refused to talk and to eat to get rid of my abusive parents who were poisoning my life. My whole life, my parents were not nice. They forbade me to do almost everything and would scream at me every time they got the chance. When I was 5, I got very sick and feverish. I couldn't even get up from my bed. But my parents thought I was faking it. When they were taking me to the doctor by bus, I was crying, but they told me that I was embarrassing them and that if I didn't stop, they would take me back. So I had to hold back my tears all the way there. When I started school, they wouldn't let me out of my room because they expected me to study all the time and then sleep. On the weekends, my parents would go out and make me stay home and clean the entire house. If I would refuse, they would scream at me and confine me to my room, the same as during the week. They would never let me talk. I had to be as silent as possible. So by the time I was 15, I had no friends at all, simply because I was afraid to talk to anyone. My classmates and even my teachers hated me because they thought I was weird. When I wished happy birthday to Emily, one of the girls from our class, and gave her a necklace I made myself, she laughed at it and threw it in the trash because it was ugly. I took it out of the trash and they continued to laugh at me, calling me a hobo. When a teacher asked me something, I couldn't answer because I was too scared. But they thought I was stupid. Every time I tried to explain my situation at home, they would get angry at me because I was coming up with excuses. So I gave up. I stopped talking at all. No more talking because it made everything worse. I also hoped that maybe someone would notice it and it would help me somehow. Every time a teacher asked me something, I stayed silent. They would get angry but then just forget about it and move on. During breaks, I would sit alone. But people would come to me, trying to test my patience. One guy, Emmett, who would bully me a lot, would shout in my ear as loud as he could, trying to get a reaction from me. But I didn't do anything. Sometimes this guy would even come to my house and throw eggs at my window, or some stuff like that. He really hated me. Emily and her friends would ask me questions, and when I didn't respond, they would physically push me. One day, they were all chewing gum and spat them out in my hair. I noticed it only after a few hours of people laughing at me. I gave myself a very short haircut, and it looked extremely ugly. At some point, they all gave up on me and left me alone because I wasn't reacting. The last one who talked to me was Emmett. He told me, maybe if you stood up for yourself, you wouldn't be so pathetic. And finally, all this silence paid off. After numerous complaints, I was sent to the principal. He was asking me questions, but of course I didn't answer. He thought I was mocking him and called my parents. When they came, they were acting all nice and told him I was sick. I mean mentally. And that maybe I needed a month at home to heal and stuff. At this point, I remembered what Emmett said and I finally spoke up. I wanted to tell him everything about how I was abused my whole life, how I was like a slave in my own home and that they hated me. I wanted to speak for the first time in months, but my parents quickly shut me up by telling the principal that I just forgot to take my medication and that I just needed some time at home. The principal didn't care and agreed to let me stay at home. I was devastated. Even when I said something, it didn't help. My parents were screaming at me the whole way home, saying how embarrassed they were to have such a useless and ugly daughter. But I wasn't responding. Before, they didn't even notice that I wasn't talking. But now it got on their nerves. At home, they continued to scream at me, demanding that I start talking. But I didn't. It was a protest and the best thing I could do to annoy them. My mom took my favorite childhood toy, a bunny. Even at 15, I was still sleeping with him. She took him by the head and said, "Talk." I didn't, so she ripped his head off and threw him out the window. I could sew pretty well, so I ran outside to get him back, but my dad blocked my way and then took me to my room. They locked my door, demanding that I start talking, and they took away my phone and my books. I was laying down in an empty room, and the only thing I could do was look out of my window. To not go crazy, I was silently having conversations with myself. I also refused to eat to prove my point. At some point, they put a sandwich into my room. I was ready to bite it, but then I put it back. I decided that I wasn't going to eat. I only drank water occasionally. My parents kept berating and pressuring me, and all I wanted was for them to leave me alone. And I couldn't wait to move out when I turned 18. I even wrote them a letter explaining this, but they refused, thinking I would break. But I knew that sooner or later I would win this and get what I wanted. After a week of this, someone threw a stone at my window. It was Emmett. He was holding a piece of cardboard with "Creepy Idiot" written on it, and he was smiling. But when he saw me in my state, his smile disappeared and he dropped the cardboard. We looked at each other for a minute, and then he ran away. After a few days, the police came to our house. I don't remember any of it because I was at my limit. I only remember a lot of screaming and weird sounds. I was put in the hospital where I was fed through a tube. Doctors, psychiatrists, and social workers were coming to me, asking me questions. And I finally started speaking and told them everything. It was nice, but I still felt alone. I didn't know what exactly had happened, but I found out soon. One nurse told me a boy, the one who told the police, was coming every day and asking about me. They kept telling him he could visit me, but he always refused. I knew it was Emmett. Sometimes he would bring me chocolate or something like that, or wait for hours at the hospital, but he would never come in to actually see me. After some time, I was put into a foster home for a while, and I was much better and healthier. At some point, I was informed that my parents were put in jail. And you know what? I smiled. I was happy. Maybe it was cruel, but they deserved it. And then things got even better. I was put into another foster home, but it was in another city. I texted Emmett that I was moving away and that I wanted him to visit me while we still had the chance. And he came. We were just chatting outside. He never looked at me in the eye and just stood there holding his hands in his pocket. I asked him why he did what he did, if he hated me. He tried to explain that he never actually hated me, but strangely, he could not finish his sentence and changed the subject. After 20 minutes of us talking, Emmett left. He kind of awkwardly shook my hand. While I was watching him walk away, I was thinking that I didn't want him to leave, and that I finally had at least one reason to stay in the city. But I had to leave. My new foster family in another city was very nice, and I wasn't used to that. So at first, I was very closed off. But after a few months of consistent love and respect, I started to like them. I was trying to hold in my emotions because I knew at some point I had to leave this family and move on. Then, one evening, they asked me to sit down for a serious talk. I was ready to be told that I had to move again, and tried to be unemotional, but then they asked me if I wanted to be adopted by them. I burst into tears for the first time in years. I said yes, and they hugged me. I kept in touch with Emmett. We were chatting almost every day, and I was telling him how happy I was and how grateful I was for him. And then one day, he said he would come to my city to visit me, and I was so happy to hear that. But when he came, he hit me with some terrible news. Both of us were shy, but happy to see each other. I started to realize that Emmett liked me, and I liked him. And he didn't just come to visit. He ran away from home because he was tired of his parents, who were as abusive as mine. And he wanted to start working, and then he wanted me to move in with him. He confessed his love to me, something he wasn't able to do for years. He asked me to run away with him, to ditch school and finally to start living like we wanted to. I didn't know what to say. I finally had a loving family and friends, so I just shook my head. I asked him to try to finish school and then we could start a life together or something, but instead, Emmett just stood up and left. I was devastated because he disappeared from social media and I don't know where he is or what has happened to him. He probably felt betrayed by me. I will keep on studying and trying to get better so I can have a chance to lead a good life and help Emmett if he appears in my life again.
Hello, I'm Monica, and my stepmother hated me so much I had to move out. But let's start from the beginning. My mom died when I was around 3 years old, and it made my dad miserable because he loved her very much. For years, he was single, not even daring to start dating again. But when I was 14, he met Taylor. She kind of looked like my mother, but as I was told, she wasn't anything like her in terms of character. My dad asked me if I would be okay with this, and of course, I said yes because I wanted him to be happy. Soon they married, and Taylor moved in with us, together with her son James, who was 12 at the time. At first, everything was all right. My dad and Taylor loved each other very much, and James was quite easygoing. I hadn't seen my dad so happy in years. But soon, I started to notice how Taylor was manipulating him. She would always make him adapt to her lifestyle, and if she did something wrong, she turned everything around so it was my dad who was at fault. I wasn't having any of it, and Taylor disliked my attitude and started treating me badly and always blaming me if something happened. Even if James did something, it was my fault. For example, she would get angry at me because I didn't wash the dishes, even if there was only one dirty plate, and James ate from it. It was me who got lectured by Taylor, and that's the least of things she would say or do. At first, my dad was trying to defend me, but she eventually made him think that she was right and I was a spoiled, ungrateful kid. She told me that I was stealing our money, and it wasn't true. And I don't know where she got this idea from. By this point, our entire family turned on me. Taylor was as condescending as ever, and if I tried to defend myself, my dad would go, "Don't talk with your mother like that." I, of course, answered, "She is not my mother and she never will be," which would make my dad angry. And James listened to all of this and started to see me as a villain too, and Taylor was turning him against me as well. Why did Taylor do that? I guess she didn't like how much attention my father was giving me, which was understandable because I am his daughter. Ugh. Seeing how Taylor took over our lives, I tried to talk to Dad, but he wouldn't listen. So I approached my grandparents, explained them the situation, and asked if I could move with them. They said yes, and they also disliked Taylor very much. I moved out. Both me and Taylor were happy about it. Living with my grandparents had its own difficulties, but it was way better than living with Taylor. My dad would call me every day and visit every weekend at first, but then he called and visited less and less, probably because Taylor was whining about how he didn't love her. My dad was trapped, but it was his decision, and while I still loved him, I couldn't simply overlook how he treated me. After a year, it felt like I wasn't part of the family at all, and I saw my father 2 times a month at best. At worst, it could go for 2 months without him meeting with me. One day he called me and said, "Honey, please come home. I talked with Taylor and she is okay with that." Seriously? Taylor is okay with that? I rudely answered my father, I would never even step into the house while she is still there. I expected my father to call, to apologize, to try to fix that, but it never happened. I understand that he was afraid to be lonely again, and I didn't mind him having a woman, but it wasn't okay how she treated me. Nothing helped, even when my grandparents tried to talk about it with him, so I completely gave up on it. 2 years had passed since, and he was still with her, and he was miserable again. By this point, I felt like my grandparents were my parents, and I had a lot of things going on in my life. My first serious boyfriend, school, and other stuff, so I didn't even think about it anymore. One day, to my surprise, James wrote me on Facebook. He was saying how sorry he was about how I was treated and that he didn't understand it at the time, but he wanted us to be friends, or at least not be enemies. I asked him what made him do that, and he told me all about his mom, Taylor, and how she only got crazier with time. Later, I met with James, and I was honestly proud of him because he was such a smart, good guy. He said that my dad was much better to him than his real dad ever was, and Taylor was mad every time he took his side. He said that he saw that father was tired, and maybe someday he would finally separate with her. James wanted us to be friends, even siblings, and support each other. And even if Dad and Taylor separated, he wished to stay in touch. I don't know what will happen in the future, and I'm still hurt about losing my dad. But at least I found a new family member who is a good person. I really miss my dad. Before Taylor, he was the best dad anyone could ever wish for. I hope that one day he would realize his mistake and that we can be a family again.